All right, so today we're going to be talking about Louis XIV. Now, to start off with a bit of background information, the Protestant Reformation has recently been reaching a fever pitch at this time. France was heavily divided by the religious wars, certain nobles being Protestant while other nobles were firmly Catholic, and this basically ended with Henry of Navarre, right, when he came to power. Now, he was originally a Protestant, but he ended up converting to Catholic, issuing one of his famous statements, Paris is worth a mass. And basically, by converting to Catholicism, he became the heir to the French throne. So once he assumed power, he was able to reconcile the monarchical power and temporarily bring an end to the French religious wars. And this was achieved through what became known as the Edict of Nantes, right? And this stated that the Protestants could arm themselves in their castles and basically defend themselves against the Catholic raids that had been happening during the French religious wars. And France began to heal from this, but the damage was pretty severe. This was basically the backdrop to which Louis XIV rose to power. Now we get to his ascension to the throne. Now, Louis XIV inherited the throne when he was only 5 years old. His father had died suddenly. And during this time, the French nation was plunged into revolt. This revolt was known as the Fronde, right? And it lasted from 1648 to 1653. And this revolt greatly reduced the power of the monarchy. It also scarred the young King Louis, and it was this violent uprising that the new king would realize he could not rule from Paris. He had to move. He had to leave. But before we get to that, one of the major themes in Louis XIV's life and rule was political absolutism. Now, absolutism was a term that arose during the 16th century. However, this concept had been done prior to this with Henry VIII. And it's basically when a monarch has complete control over the people in his domain. This is typically achieved through utilizing religion. And it's also difficult to achieve since the monarch is required to have absolute control over his nobles, his clergy, and his peasantry. Henry VIII was able to do it because he became the head of the church. So his nobles had to basically declare loyalty. But for someone who's going to remain Catholic, like Louis XIV, it's going to require a bit of work. Now, the monarch would, in effect, be the only voice in politics and be able to fully run every aspect of his or her domain. Louis XIV was one of the most famous absolute monarchs, and it was his reign that started the absolutism trend that would continue into different countries and different centuries. But to be an absolute authority, he needed to revoke some autonomy. You couldn't really be an absolutist with an autonomous nobles running around. So he needed to fully control the Protestants and the Catholics in his country if he wanted to be able to have this power. So he decided to revoke the Edict of Nantes. This basically revoked the Protestants' right to hold up in their castles and have an army of their own. And it gave him power over both the Protestants and the Catholics, since it showed his ability to remove any autonomy that any institution had. Now, this had some severe consequences that didn't affect Louis XIV directly. It mainly meant that the people, the Huguenots, right, these were the Protestants in France, would go away and move into Prussia. And this was the backdrop to why Prussia became the power that it was, having these well-educated nobility, Protestant nobility, being forced out of France, moving to Prussia.